Although for now I do like how the numbers look at the moment, so we'll see how it will perform in actual combat. Now for the engineering rigs, I may go with... Well, that's actually a very good... for the engineering rigs, I actually don't really know what to... I think I'll just go with targeting rigs in the end, because it already has a good capacitor. If I go with an active tank, I'll definitely go with capacitor rigs, but if I go with a passive tank, then maybe auxiliary thrusters or targeting rigs. Depends which rigs will benefit the ship more. So I guess I'll also have to test that out to see, basically to see what combination will work the best. Now I forgot to change the implants. Speaking of the implants, you have three options with missiles basically. You have the tactical missiles, you have warhead charge and support projection. Now my personal favorite is definitely the warhead charge. It does increase your DPS quite a bit, and it is a lot more, I would say, sustained than the tactical missiles. The tactical missiles give you a very nice burst. They do give you more paper DPS, but they also do have some drawbacks. Like for example, they do reduce some of the missile damage application. Meanwhile, the warhead charge does improve the DPS, but it doesn't really affect the other stats. You can only improve the range and basically improve the damage application, but when you do that, you actually sacrifice a little bit of DPS, which in some cases is a very good trade-off, since when you apply more damage, you're basically doing more damage than before, but the total DPS is reduced. Alright, let's undock and let me show you the active stats of the Raven Navy. Now, my Raven Navy will probably be built very similar to my Makaril, although that is unless I find a combination that I just end up liking more. So there is also the chance that I might just go full on brick tank on it, either full DPS, a tank DPS, or a full on brick tank. A brick tank Raven Navy is hilarious because that thing is like a dreadnought in terms of how much tank you can get out of them. Very, very hard to kill ships when tanked. One of the traits for the navies is their tank. They are built to be very tanky. Alright, so let's take a look at the DPS. 3713.12, 541,000 hit points, 71, 73, 83 and 81, which is pretty solid. When I go into the DPS modes, switching to explosive or thermal missiles, 4,317.82, and with the first ballistic control active, 5,354, and with the second one, the DPS is 6,718.29, and this is pretty solid for a battleship that's using rapid missiles. 1.6 million hit points with the damage control active, and it lasts 23 seconds. It also has a reduced reactivation delay, so you can use the damage control a lot more often, but the activation effect is really good. It's basically almost half a minute of the damage control being active, which is awesome. That can absorb an insane amount of damage, which is basically what the damage control is designed to do. Now, instead of the one extender, you can also add an extra ballistic control. You can also add some missile guidance computers. Basically, you can add any module that your ship needs in the exact moment. I think in my case, the extender might be kind of overkill, but in some cases, the extender is actually really useful. So, depending on the target, sometimes I might use an extender, sometimes I might go full DPS, but for the vast majority of time, I think I'll just go with the triple ballistic controls, since that's just the build that seems to be working really well for the past 2 years. I don't know how long this builds. I mean, I had this built on most of my ships, on most of my PvP ships for like 3 years, 4 years now. So that build has been out for a while. 3,168.02 DPS with this current build for 97,000 hit points. The shield volume has been reduced a little bit, but the overall resistance does remain the same. 5,094 and 6,344 with the implant. Okay, with the first ballistic control 7.2 thousand, with the second ballistic control 8.1 thousand, and with the third one we have about 8,759.67 DPS with rapid missiles. And this is a lot of DPS for rapid missiles. Basically, the Raven Navy has the paper DPS of a Raven, but the damage application of a Typhoon too. Basically, if you combine the Raven Striker with the Typhoon, you get the Raven Navy. And that by itself does make this ship very unique. It is kind of like a Barghest, although I think it does more damage than a Barghest. The Barghest is good, has range, but I think the Navy in that aspect does a bit better. We'll have to test that out, I guess. Now let me show you the active stats with the warhead charge. Again, I would personally use the warhead charge over the tactical missiles, but both implants have their own use and both are really good in their own way, so it doesn't matter which one you use, both are very good. 497,000 hit points, this remains the same, 71, 71, 79, 83 and 81% resistance, which is again really good, and this is basically more tank than some tank battleships have with proper tank rigs and tank modules. So I'm personally really happy with this result. It can only be better since I have no nanocore on this ship, and when I fly my own Raven Navy I will also have no nanocore on it. I think I'll have no nanocore. Maybe I will buy a green or blue one, but there's a good chance that my Raven Navy will have no nanocore, which is fine. If I do get one, I'll focus on extra tank, but if not on extra tank, I'll focus on extra DPS. So still have that to decide, I guess, but it shouldn't be a big problem. 10,236.22 DPS with torpedo launchers. And this is basically the type of DPS that just wrecks a carrier. A PvE carrier that gets jumped by a Raven Navy is just doomed. Especially if their fighters are very far away. By the time the fighters reach the Navy, the carrier will be taking 50-60,000 alpha hits from the Raven, and that will basically wreck it. They are... I mean, the carriers are quite an easy target if they got caught off guard, which is what I see happening all over the game at the moment. The Raven Navy is the #1 choice to kill carriers that are running PvE stuff in nullsec, and that kind of also inspired me to try the ship out for myself, since could be that I find a CN carrier running PvE. If that happens, I'm definitely throwing a navy on that ship. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to go with that ship. Since I mean, I think the other navies can do the same, but I feel like the alpha damage from the Raven Navy is basically unmatched by other Navy battleships. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to get that ship. Now it will be time to test out the tank of a Raven Navy versus a carrier. Now usually you will not be stumbling upon faction carriers. They are generally more tanky, and they generally speaking do a lot more damage. So, and this faction carrier is basically built for PvP. So in this case, in a battle like this, the carrier will definitely outmatch and outperform the Raven. But I'm still doing some very good damage on the versatile assault ship. Again, this is a situation that is not really the type of scenario where you would like to use a Raven Navy. I mean, you definitely want to use it against the carrier, but not if the carrier is waiting for you. If the carrier is waiting for you, then solo, yeah, it will probably eat your ship, since they can have some very nasty DPS. And I think this Vazago here has about 16,000 DPS, which is quite a bit. And as you can see, the Vazago had almost no problems to go through the shield of the Raven. And since this is a shield tank, once it hits armor, it's basically game over. So that was an example of how much this build can. Yeah, 16,007.79 DPS on the Vazago, which is kind of scary. A normal carrier will have definitely much less than that, so you will be able to tank a normal carrier much easily. But since I'm testing out some builds that will be a bit extreme, I was very curious to see how much can that build tank. And honestly, it did tank well. After all, that is a very nasty versatile assault ship. They used to have less DPS than a carrier. Now, as you can see, they roll 16,000 DPS, so no surprise that it went through the tank that easily. Now I changed the build a little bit, and I'll be going back to see how I changed the implant. Now have the rocket charge, which in this case I think might be the better option, since you want to shoot the carrier at the lower resistances. In this case, the Vazago has a hole on EM and thermal on shield, so I will be switching to thermal missiles, and the kinetic missiles or explosive missiles will be used for armor. And I think this will definitely do quite a bit of damage. Now the Navy is tanking really well, and we still have the balance patch coming up somewhere, hopefully in September. So there's a good chance that the navies get buffed. If they do change damage control, then the navies will definitely be a lot more tanky. Hopefully they do change the damage control activation time from 23 seconds to about 45 seconds, or even a minute. Will definitely help at the crazy amount of high DPS that we have in the game at the moment. But nevertheless, the shield on the Navy definitely went down, and it did well. They did some good damage on the Vazago. Again, a faction carrier does have roughly, I think, 45 to 50% more hit points than a normal carrier, so it is expected that they withstand, and they're also a lot more tankier. So not really surprised that they are holding very good. Now let me do something silly here. I will go and do a full-on chunk brick tank, and I will be testing out how long can this thing last versus a carrier. This is also something that I'm very interested in. I mean, again, the amount of DPS on that Vazago is, I think, more than double of the DPS that you will encounter on a average carrier. So the Raven Navy will definitely last a lot longer, even with the previous build. But with a build like this, how long will it last? That's the question. And how many of these ships built in a very similar way do you need to effectively disable a faction carrier? Now, based on the tank and based on the performance that I've seen so far, I would estimate about 3 or 4 of these navies built with a strong tank would be enough to basically shoot down a versatile assault ship. However, doesn't have to be tank build. If they have a DPS build, I think that would be much faster. Maybe 2 or 3 of these navy ships with a DPS tank would be enough to quickly eliminate a versatile assault ship that's built for DPS. And this is only going to work against carriers that are mostly glass, since a tanky carrier might live long enough to break your tank. So it kind of goes both ways if you think about it, since if the carrier doesn't have a lot of DPS, then it is not going to break your tank that quick, and the battle will definitely take longer. But if the carrier has a lot of DPS, then in return it is not going to have a lot of tank, and then it will definitely go down faster. So in the end, it's that type of game that you expect to occur when fighting with the ships. It all depends on your build, on your skills, and on your target skills and target build. Well, this is a old school build with a lot of adaptives, and even with a damage control, this type of build might be very good again with the new extenders, with the shield generators, because they do have a lot of very nice passive boost, passive shield tank boost, and there's a good chance that they might be buffed in September. If they do buff the passive shield regeneration, then that would basically open up an entire new, I guess, era of tank build, because a passive shield regeneration build would be a valid option, and shield tanks would definitely benefit a lot from extra passive regeneration. Would make a build like this extremely tanky, and they already made the super carriers extremely tanky. The shield tank super carriers are extremely powerful with their shield regeneration, and if there was a capital shield generator, those things would be very scary. Maybe we're looking at 300 to 350,000 DPS passive tank on a shield tank super capital if they had the capital shield generators. So if they do launch the capital one, I'll definitely be playing around with that, because I really want to see that regeneration in action. It should be quite silly. But first, I would like to see that on the normal ships, which I think is happening. So the next balance patch is kind of important because of all these things. Again, there is no exact list of things that are being changed. We are still waiting on more info, but I know for a fact that it is coming, so we will see what they have in store for us. I also hope for a lot of nerfs as well. Well, this now tanks really well, and it definitely can buy you enough time to tackle a carrier and basically live long enough until the rest of your fleet warps in. So this kind of build is still, I would say, very nice, especially in a fleet where you have logis, since if you have a logi at your side and if you have a very tanky ship, that's not going to die that easily. So for a fleet, it's definitely going to be quite interesting. Even a bait, I think even a bait build can work in the same way, since that damage control can absorb a lot of DPS, and this is the type of build that a glass DPS ship is not going to be able to break within the first 15 seconds. This is the type of build that kills those annoying high DPS ships that usually run around eating ships left and right, because they have high burst, but damage control and high resistance loves high burst because it absorbs it, and he will do just like 10% damage at best. And since your DPS ship will have basically no tank, if you can't warp out, you are dead. Since if you can't break the tank and kill the ship within 30 seconds, well, then it's GG, as they say. Now here I'm trying out something different, a lot more adaptives, and I will slap one. I think I'll slap one damage control here. Let me find, there it is. Okay, I have a lot of modules here that I have to actually, hold a second. I can try a lot of adaptives, reactive, and I think instead of the extender I can also slap a damage control. This is kind of a full-on brick. This is a full-on brick build, brick trunk. I don't know, there is like 1,000 names that we can assign to a build like that. But yeah, this is a full-on trunk build, maximum resistance and a little bit of passive shield extension. And this is definitely something that is not really that practical, although could be an excellent bait. If you expect enormous DPS to fly at your ship, then something like this is definitely kinda funny to use, since they will definitely not break this in 10 seconds. Yeah, 1.4 million hit points. Yikes. We are around I would say carrier territory of tank. I mean, this thing has more tank than my carrier, so that's kind of funny. That's kind of scary, to be honest. But that's just what Navy battleships do. They are very scary. Alright, so let's see how long it will take for the Vazago to break this. I think it will take quite a while, but I might be wrong. After all, it's a Vazago that we're talking about. They have some very good scary DPS. They are not immortal though. The faction carriers are very risky to fly. They're extremely risky to fly, since a dreadnought can easily kill them. Multiple dreadnoughts and the Vazago just dies. Although they still have some good tank attached to them, but not exactly dreadnought territory. But yeah, they'll still tank, but just not dreadnought territory. Well, that's very little damage that the Raven is taking from the Vazago. Very little damage. I'm wondering if the damage control can reach the second cycle. If it can do that, that would be hilarious, but I don't think that's gonna happen. If you have a Logi at your side, then this will definitely work. I can see a small carrier hunting fleet use something similar. Basically one tank, heavy tackle as I like to call it, to land and basically tackle the carrier, to tank the DPS, to tank the initial bombard, and to tank the initial fighter DPS, or in this case the lightweight ship DPS. And then after the heavy tackle, then you have the Logis and support ships land to add more DPS to the carrier. So definitely has some potential to be used, although I feel like this type of tank is a little bit overkill, although in this day and age in the game, having overkill tank isn't exactly overkill, since there's a lot of DPS flying around, so you kind of want to have as much chunk as possible in some cases, depending on the target. Usually in a normal situation it is not like that necessary, but in rare occasions when you know that your target has a lot of DPS, then you definitely do want to make sure that your tank can easily hold for a while against such a opponent. And usually in my case, I get a lot of DPS thrown at me. If I ever get like jumped, usually like I'm being thrown. They're throwing like a lot of DPS at me usually when I'm getting jumped, which, you know, is kind of a thing that's been happening for quite a while. But that's why I have brick tank ships, and that's why I also do fit. Not all of my ships are tanks, but a vast majority of my ships used to be, and still are, very good tanks. However, recently I started to fly frigates, cruisers, battleships that have a little less tank, but that didn't really prevent that didn't really like replace my tanks, since my tanks have a very specific purpose, and I still like all of my tanky ships. Now, I'm going to be trying out a active shield booster build. Although I feel like with the Raven Navy, passive might be the way to go till the end, but I feel like you can make a very solid active tank out of these ships. Now, you can easily replace some of the general units, add a Nosferatu unit, add a ship booster, boost them out unit. You can even integrate the ship in such a way that it does give you extra resistances and that it does give you extra shield booster amount, basically extra shield boost per cycle, which combined with a very crazy tank. I mean, I still have like over 1,000,000 hit points, so yeah, that's kinda wild for a Battleship. Which should mean that a active tank like this should technically be able to withstand a lot of DPS. Now, depending on the targets, a active tank might be the way to go. Against a Balgorn, an active tank is definitely not the way to go, because, you know, Balgorns are vampires and they will be going through your capacitor, and you definitely want to have a very solid passive tank versus a Balgorn, since you can't really rely on any active way of supplying your tank if your opponent is a Balgorn. Against a Balgorn, basically full passive tank, and once your capacitor is down, the Balgorn will also be unable to repair itself, and then the Balgorn will slowly but surely die, since the Balgorn does rely on its own capacitor. It also relies on your own capacitor, so if you have no capacitor, then the Balgorn will have no capacitor. One of the tricks that you can use at dealing with those Blood Raider ships. And of course, one very important aspect of that is also the fact that a reactive shield hardener, or a reactive, preferably a armor tank build in the case of a Balgorn, since laser DPS drastically drops off at armor. You'll be taking a lot more damage on the shield than armor if you are fighting a Balgorn. Also, one of the tricks that, I mean, I'm not saying armor tank a Raven Navy. The Raven Navy remains a shield tank. It has a lot of shield, but any other ship should do a armor tank, unless of course it is a shield tank versus a ship that's using lasers, because, you know, lasers just don't really do much damage on armor, and you can take advantage of that quite easily. One of the reasons why my Macariel is actually a armor tank, since at the moment on armor that Macariel is doing really well. I'm not complaining about that ship at all. It's a fantastic battleship. Well, I call the battleship a oversized cruiser, because, you know, it's a Macariel. They're just different beasts, as a lot of players like to point out. Anyway, the active tank, I mean, it's holding really well. I'm very happy with all the builds so far. They seem to be holding really well. No issues. The only issue that you might see would be the capacitor, but you can easily tweak that out by replacing a module or two in the low slots to add one capacitor battery. A capacitor battery active tank built with Nosferatus is definitely going to be quite an interesting thing to roll on this ship. Now, let me change some of the general units. I think I only did a Maelstrom with quad shield boosters, and only once, and that was kind of a experimental build. At the time I was trying to see if I can get a ship to perform. I was trying to see if I can make a shield tank perform like my Hyperion with quad armor repairs. Long story short, it did work, it just wasn't very effective it just wasn't really effective. The armor repairs just used a lot less capacitor, and that kind of build was really not that practical for a active shield tank ship, but it was quite hilarious to use it on a Hyperion with quad armor repairs. Now, let's see how a triple shield booster build will work. This is because I was very curious to see how long the capacitor will run, and I was also curious to see how the tank will be impacted by having one less reactive but one extra shield booster.
We're under attack.
I think in the longer run it will be about the same, but it may be a bit better, maybe a bit worse. I mean, again, the Vazago just does a lot of DPS, and your shield will be able to sustain itself for quite some time, but eventually you can expect the shield to go down, since you're after all up against a carrier, and carriers can have some very nasty DPS, but in a normal situation you are definitely not going to be attacking a carrier that's waiting for you. This type of tactic with the Raven works against PvE carriers. A PvP ready carrier is definitely a different beast, definitely something different, especially a tanky one, but there is a question: is it better to have a tanky carrier or a DPS carrier? I think a DPS carrier can be better, and this is just theoretical. Can be better if you can kill a target before the reinforcements arrives, but you will probably not be able to kill a navy in a short amount of time, since they are built for tanking. Even if you have the bomber tactic implant ready, they have the damage control, and that can just absorb all the DPS that you throw at it. And by the time you are tackled, the rest of the fleet is basically on their way. So unless you can just delete the battleship, the heavy tackle, or any other tackle for that matter, in seconds, then a DPS build, in that case, if you can do that, then a DPS build will definitely be, okay. But if you can't execute the ship so fast until the rest of the fleet arrives, then you might be in trouble, since you'll be jumped by a bunch of ships and they will be able to break your tank, since a glass carrier usually doesn't have much tank available. In most cases, from what I've seen, maybe a shield booster, but in a lot of cases I haven't seen even a shield booster. Literally just paper glass, full DPS, with a bunch of damage mods and with a bunch of micro wardrobe guides. Basically a carrier with 360,000 hit points, which is something like a Battleship, so no wonder that these ships just get deleted that quickly. A tanky carrier for the other case can tank for a while, and you can even wait for reinforcement to actually arrive. So I guess both types of builds have their ups and downs, so in the end it's very situational. Now here I am removing the integrations, and I'll just do a classic DPS build. This is what my Raven Navy will most likely look like, and this will be a PvE high sec only build. Basically full DPS, very little tank. After all, you don't really have to have a lot of tank for high sec. These things are so ridiculous tanky. I think you don't even need to use an adaptive. You can add 4 of the ballistic controls, or 4 of any damage mod basically is the current upper limit. 5 is just overkill. So you can spare that one extra low slot for perhaps a missile guidance computer, something to enhance the other missile parameters. Or even add more tank, more battery. You can add any module that you like in that place, and you will still have, in this case, you will have a lot of DPS. 5.7 thousand DPS with rapid missiles, with the one ballistic control active, 6.8 thousand with the second one active, with the third one 7.6 thousand, and with the fourth one, this ship has 8060.12 DPS, which is fantastic. It's really high DPS, and it should possess some very high alpha damage as well.
Autopilot engaged.
And now let's run
Destination reached.
a mission. Let's see how this boat performs. Now, up until quite recently, the player's favorite PvE ship,
Warp
and I
drive
think
active.
it still kind of is player's favorite PvE ship, was the Apocalypse Striker, Apocalypse Navy. Lasers have been generally accepted as the ideal PvE weapon because of how the focus crystal laser works. It is basically a implant that's made for PvE. It has some PvP applications, but the vast majority of players use it for PvE. That's where it shines the most. Now, recently, I think around the time when they added the new skills,
Attack.
players started to prefer railguns, and in some cases the Vindicator, Megaton Striker and Megaton Navy became some favorites for a lot of players, and I can see why. A lot of DPS, extra range, it made blasters really good. But recently, with the introduction of the navies, especially the Raven Navy, with the introduction of some other adjustments and new skills, balance updates and stuff like that, it made the Raven Navy the favorite for a lot of players. Especially the default, the ship stats, the fusion between a Raven and a Typhoon, which is what this ship kind of feels like, is the thing that made a lot of players interested in this ship. Now there is the Barghest. Although the Barghest is like 15 billion on the market, this costs maybe 2 billion, 2.5 billion on the market, although the insurance cost is basically like a Barghest. So in the end, the Barghest and the Raven Navy are kind of neck and neck, you know. They're kind of very close to each other in terms of performance, but the vast majority of players would prefer a Navy Raven over the Barghest because of the tank. Now the Barghest has some very nice range, has very nice damage application, but the Barghest is literally paper, and it costs a lot. It is a priority target, it is a very juicy target. Everyone wants to have a Barghest kill. I've killed maybe 7 of these ships so far. I think it's around 7, might be a bit less, but about that number. I had a chance to shoot at quite a few of these battleships, and they usually just die quickly. They can't tank much. They're very paper. They're fast. They have been buffed. Their speed has been buffed, but yeah, they're still very paper, and they rely on long range. The Raven Navy, on the other hand, is actually easier to use, much easier to use. The extra tank does make a lot of players comfortable, because you know that the ship can take some hits before going down. You know that you can tank, and that's by itself is a massive advantage over the Barghest if we look at the Raven and the Barghest. Now, one thing where the Raven doesn't really do well is the speed. It is not that fast, but if you have a lot of tank, do you really need a lot of speed? Well, in some cases you do need speed, but if you know how to fly the ship, you will definitely avoid situations where you have to rely on speed. So in this case, on the Raven, you should definitely rely on the tank and on the missiles. Don't really rely on the speed. It is a very, I would say, a very interesting ship in that aspect, since it can technically be made to be fast, technically, but I would still choose. I think I would choose warp speed and maybe like warp corrupt mothers and stuff like that over auxiliary thrusters. Doesn't mean that you can't make it fast, doesn't mean that it's not a valuable option. It definitely has use and probably has some good use there, but in my case I think I'll just go after either maximum DPS or maximum chunk. Depends on what I'll do with the ship. The DPS build Raven Navy is very strong. It does feel like a tanky battleship with a tank build, but it's not a tank build. It's a DPS build, but the default stats are just so tanky, so good that it feels like you're flying a tanky ship. The tank build feels like you're flying a dreadnought, because that's just the numbers that you see on the fitting window, basically like flying a light version of a dreadnought. So both definitely have their interesting use. Now I think besides the Raven Navy I will also buy a Tempest Navy, because I have some very good skills for missiles and definitely want to take advantage of that. So Tempest Navy will probably be next, and that will be very funny to see how much DPS and how much tank I can get out of that thing. But this was the Raven Navy. I presented some of the builds that my own Raven Navy will be using, and this is about the performance
Warp
that
drive active.
I expect to get out of the Raven Navy. Overall, very happy with the ship. Performs really well. It has some very nice DPS. The tank is absolutely fantastic, so I'm very excited to see how it will do in combat. And well, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed as well. It was actually a very chill run
Docking request
with the Raven.
accepted.
And well, with that being said, stay safe, fly safe. As always, I'll see you next time.